Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're currently in Genesis chapter 16. One of the most interesting things about this, now, I kind of made mention of this in the last study, and we're going to see it here. God tells Abraham that from his body will come his son, the promised son. So maybe Abraham did not understand because God didn't necessarily mention Sarah. And one of the things about this chapter that's going to unfold in this chapter is we see a lot of things that we would find extremely objectionable here. And I'll get to it as we go through this chapter here. Keep in mind that this is the result of sin. In other words, the curse and sin. And mainly that women will be treated extremely badly. That's just the way it is. Most of human history, women have been treated badly. When you go back to what God created with Eve, so from that, women, most of the time, all around the world, they have not achieved that. Probably better in more modern times, within the last 50 years. But if you even think about it, they even say to this day the inequities between things like women's treatment, salaries, so forth and so on. But so let's go on. Just as we read these things, just keep it in mind. This is what sin produced too. All right. First one says, Abram's wife Sarah had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarah said to Abram, "Since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family." And Abram agreed to what Sarah said. Right off, the one thing we see is one of the first mentions of surrogacies, right? So we see this today, and we think, wow, at least I do. I think this crazy, but surrogacies today, and there's always problems with these anything other than the God ordained marriage. It just comes with promise. We're going to see this again throughout. And so when the first thing is, he takes a slave and says, okay, go sleep with the slave, have child, and then I'm going to snatch up the child. Later on, there will be a law. I don't know exactly where it would come from, but there would be a law that says that if your brother dies, in order to keep his name up, the oldest brother or one of the brothers would go in and sleep with the woman, have a child, usually one, and then that child would be dedicated to the name of the deceased brother. Crazy to me. All right. The first thing is that the misunderstanding of God's promise. And you see Sarah kind of orchestrating this. She is the mistress of the house. She is doing this, and she will come to regret it, as whenever you go outside of God's plan, it does. So, verse 3, so Abram's wife, Sarah, took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she realized she was pregnant, she treated her mistress with contempt. In other words, it sounds like Hagar got out of place. She was a slave, and she started really showing this, as if she was better. Now, keep in mind, a woman having a child A woman having a male heir was everything in these days. For a woman not to be able to produce a male heir. Now, again, one of the things we're going to see is the women weren't valued. In other words, you could have, if a man had 7 children and one of them was a son, that's the one they paid attention to. The 6 girls, no big deal. That's just the way it is. Again, like I said, that's the way it is. Now, Hagar as a slave got out of place. So when she becomes pregnant, the attitude changes. No, you're still a slave. And she's getting ready to get reminded of that. So verse 5 says, Then Sarah said to Abram, You're responsible for my suffering. Now, I don't know, again, is this kind of woman's thing here? Right? She orchestrated this. She suggested this. And now she's blaming Abraham. All right. So, verse 5 again. Then Sarah said to Abram, You're responsible for my suffering. I put my slave into your arms. And ever since she saw that she was pregnant, she has treated me with contempt. May the Lord judge between me and you. Abram replied, let's get that here. Abram replied to Sarai, Here, your slave is in your hands. Do whatever you want with her. Then Sarah mistreated her so much that she ran away from her. Now, we're not kind of sure exactly what happened when she said mistreat. Okay, did she whoop on Hagar or something, whatever? It was so bad that she fled. And then, of course, being pregnant kind of made the situation worse, that she's mistreating a pregnant woman. But anyway, the slave ran, and it kind of to me shows that the attitude of Sarah. Why would she run in the first place as a slave? And remember, back then, you didn't have an option. There was no human rights, civil rights, and all that. Not the way life was back then. But anyway, so she runs. Verse number 7. The angel of the Lord found her by the spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. He said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She replied, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, You must go back to your mistress and submit to her mistreatment. Kind of interesting right here. He said submit to her. Right? Wow. That's kind of interesting. Submit to your mistreatment. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they will be too many to count. So, now the term too many to count is an innumerable number. You can also even say that's kind of a what they call a euphemism kind of number. Verse 11, Then the angel of the Lord said to her, You have conceived and will have a son. You will name him Ishmael. And the Lord has heard your cry, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he would live at odds with all his brothers. Some people see this in Ishmael as, when we come down, they see this as the Arab descendants, most likely, and then even Muslims try to say that they are descendants of Abraham. I don't know if this has ever been proven by genealogies, by descendants. In other words, the fact that the specific descendants of Ishmael are the Muslims today. Some people see this here. I think a lot of times people have a way of misreading things. For example, they say, well, because Muslims and Arabs, say Arabs and Muslims, notice the phrase here. Let's see, verse number 15, he said, the man would be like a wild donkey. His hand would be against everyone. So some people see this as, Muslims being terrorists. Misreading there, very misreading. And then he said that everyone's hand would be against him. And by the way, that is not true for all Muslim nations today. So again, that's classic misreading into the text that's not there. Okay. The descendants of Israel is Ishmael, and his descendants is just that, Ishmael and his descendants. Nothing to necessarily say that they were Muslim Arabs. Okay. All right. So the purpose of this here is to separate and make a plain and distinct separation from Ishmael and Isaac. That's the whole purpose of this here. This is not predicting, our future kind of Middle Eastern landscape here. Verse 13. So she called the Lord who spoke to her, the God who sees. For she said, in this place have I actually seen the one who sees me. This is why she named the spring a well of living water, a well of the living one who sees me. It is located between Kadesh and Bered. Bernish and Bered. So, and then verse 15. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son of Hagar. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. Hagar would be 13 years older than Isaac, and we'll get to him later, of course. What is interesting about this here, notice he said that Abraham gave the name of Ishmael to the son of Hagar. So why? Right? I mean, think about that. Why would Abraham, or Abram, at this point, it's Abram, why would he name Ishmael, his son Ishmael? And by the way, God is quite clear. Remember, God was quite clear that Ishmael would not be, and he's going to make it clear again that he is not the heir. That it became clear that not only will the seed of Abraham come from Abraham's body, but also Sarah. Like, okay, now we get it. So that's why there is such a clear distinction here between Ishmael's and then his seed, and we'll kind of see this later. Even in the genealogy, it's going to be clear. There is no way that you can mix up the two. There is no way, okay, that you could ever mix it up. And that's the difference. No way. And again, as I said before, the Muslim religion does not descend from Abraham. This is what Muslims said that happened. Scripture doesn't say that. Abraham's sons, both of them were believers in God, the God of Abraham, not Allah. The idea of the Muslim nation, remember, came some 600 years after the birth of Jesus. The Prophet Muhammad studied a lot of the Bible as well as other writings, but I want to say mostly the Bible. And from that study is how he developed the Quran, the writings of the Quran, the beliefs of Islam. But you trace it back to the Prophet Muhammad. You do not trace it back, and nor does any of the writings of the Quran trace back any of the Muslims or Muslim prophets back to Israel. There's no genealogy that connects them back to that. Now, keep in mind that the writings of Islam came 600 years after, the birth of Jesus. Okay, and in other words, so over a period of time, the Quran was developed. This is their writing. So, but when we read the scriptures, the sons of Abraham were believers in God. Hagar, remember, was a believer in God. God appeared to Hagar, and from that point, she calls him the Lord who sees me, and then comes to understand God's plan through Abraham, through Isaac. Hagar saw it. Ishmael saw it. So that's why when you hear this a lot, that the Muslims are traced back to Ishmael. There's no biblical truth. There's not even genealogy that ties them. So it just doesn't say that. The biggest thing about this, though, is you see, whenever man tries to, God, let me help you out. And this is what Sarah did at first. She came to regret it. It caused contentions. So again, just, we have to be patient. And Sarah come to realize, let me just be patient and God will provide. And when she tried to do it, it failed. So many times we try to do things in our own strength, with our own imaginations. We fail. Plain and simple. We fail. Okay. So, but that's Ishmael. And notice this promise also to Hagar. Now, there's a couple of things too, that Hagar becomes a blessing. So she's going to go from a slave, we will see that later, to mother of a nation. God is promising her, I'm going to make your son a great nation, great kings. I'm going to make your son that. That's the promise that's going to come. Now let me just say this. That's all because Ishmael is Abraham's son, and God says, I'm going to bless your son. He's just not going to be the promised son. But Ishmael will have a great nation and a great genealogy of nations and kings that will come from Ishmael, all because of Abraham. All right, guys. Chapter 17 in the next study. I'll see you then.